Today we're going to go over the MyoForce jump record in Noraxon MR3. So this is a jump record of a counter movement jump using 2 Vertec force plates. We also have our high-speed 9-nox cameras. However, you can use the force vector overlay using a normal Logitech webcam. That is going to be at 30 seconds, or 30 frames per second, whereas the 9-nox camera goes up to 250 frames per second. So sometimes it's important, especially during jumping, to get that higher frame rate. So I'm going to play this record at halftime. Everything that you're seeing in this window can be seen as a live stream. So as soon as you start your measurement and that person steps onto the force plate, you can see instantly the force vector overlay on both cameras. If you just have one camera, then you can choose which side, the sagittal or frontal plane. You'll also get that number, which is just that force total at that time. Now, again, if you're using one force plate, you're only going to get one force vector, usually right in the middle, so right at the center of gravity. However, you're still going to get good information from that force vector, because then you can really understand how the body is moving total relative to that vector. So upon the landing, you can observe the knees or the body shift relative to the center of gravity. During the counter movement, you can also see if the knees are inside or outside that force vector. So using it for biofeedback to help them have proper jumping and landing techniques. Also using it with squat jumps and drop jumps and even cutting maneuvers. However, this is a couple-month-old record that was taken, and so we're just going to review it today. So right away, you're going to get your force time curve. Now, this is just the vertical force. You can also take a look at your X and Y forces, as well as the moments. Going back to the vertical force, I have the right and left overlaid at this point, just to do a comparison. And then I'm going to run a report. Now, this is a report that has been done on a lot of professional teams. So NFL and NBA teams are currently using the MyoForce jump report for pre, mid, and post-season testing, along with the other battery of tests that they do to make sure and monitor their athletes are injury-free or understand their risk. So in this jump report, it's going to automatically test or find your loading, flight, and landing phase for each of your jumps. So we have only 2 jumps that we're observing here. If they did 10 jumps, it would automatically find all 10 and all of the phases for that. At the end of the jumping, if the person stands quietly for a couple of seconds, it's going to automatically detect their weight and measure that, so that any relative calculations are based on that weight. So now all I do is say next, and I'm instantly going to get this jump analysis report. We have a comparison of the left and right vertical forces across the loading, flight, and landing phase. And now that is described here at the bottom, activity. And you have a good comparison of the left and right side. If you were just using one force plate, you would just have one curve. Next, we have our jump height. You can calculate that based off of flight time or net impulse, whatever one you would like to do your calculations off of, as long as it's consistent. And then you have a comparison of your peak force, the total, versus the left and right. Now, something I didn't mention, these periods indicate the number of jumps. So this is jump number 1 and jump number 2. If we go back up to our jump height, on jump number 2, if we're using flight time, which most of the time I would use, as net impulse is actually a calculation from a calculation, Flight time is usually a bit more accurate, so it's a slightly better jump, only about 0.5 centimeters greater. However, if we're looking at our peak force, there was more peak force in the first jump than the second jump. And then you can also compare your left and right forces and see which leg was contributing more force during the jump. You can also look at vertical takeoff velocity, and now that is calculated by net impulse. And then relative peak force on the left and right side. Now that unit isn't actually in newtons. It is a percent of body weight, or a ratio. So that 1.13 is actually meaning that the peak force was 1.13 times the body weight. Next, we have max rate of force development. That is the speed at which they were able to reach peak force. And you can do a left and right comparison of that. Reactive strength index, as well as peak power and kinetic asymmetry index, comparing the left and right side during the eccentric phase, and then comparing the left and right side during the concentric phase. And lastly, we have vertical stiffness as well. So this is definitely a measure that is being monitored mid-season and post-season, or even during rehabilitation and return to play assessment. Now, there are a multitude of calculations and parameters that you can click on. If there's only a few that you would like to observe, then you would just select the ones that you want. I selected quite a few just so that we could get a full understanding of what's available to us. But there are a lot of different options here. And then if you just want to see the minimum or the range or the peak, you can select the different calculations you want done as well. And if you don't really care about having a histogram, you can just have the numbers in a table. The good thing about having a histogram is that it's a really easy way to interpret the data. It's good for the athlete as well to take home and be able to observe it without having to wrap their head around what the numbers actually mean. Now, this report can be printed. You can also export the report to an Excel file if you want just the raw data, along with all of the calculations already done for you. So there's quite a few options here, and it's really an easy tool for return to play and season athlete monitoring.